What if I told you the real battle at Stalingrad wasn't fought with guns, tanks, or artillery? What if I told you the true battle was fought in the minds of the soldiers and commanders who were locked in this ruthless confrontation? What if the soldiers who survived weren't just fighting to stay alive, but to keep their sanity intact? Welcome to Stalingrad, a place where the true cost of war wasn't measured by land or territory, but by the endurance of the human mind. A place where fear, desperation, and uncertainty shattered lives long before the first shot was fired. This is the story of a battle that tested more than the body. It tested the very limits of human willpower. The first winter in Stalingrad was unlike anything the soldiers had ever faced. Soviet soldiers dug into the ruins of the city, their bodies half frozen, hearts filled with fear, and minds constantly battling the hopelessness of their situation. The city was under siege, and for many, it seemed as if they were trapped in a living nightmare. The war wasn't just about defeating the Germans, it was about surviving the mental torture of being cut off, surrounded by death and destruction. Soviet soldiers, starving and freezing, clung to the hope that reinforcements would come, that somehow they would survive. But as the days turned into weeks and then into months, that hope began to fade. The realization began to sink in that survival wasn't just about the physical act of fighting, it was about enduring the unbearable pressure of being stuck in a war zone with no escape and no real hope of victory. The soldiers began to fight a battle that was just as grueling as any physical confrontation, the battle for their own minds. The psychological strain was immense. Fear, isolation, and doubt gnawed at their resolve. Many soldiers were left to wonder, how much longer could they endure this hell? And it wasn't just the Soviets who felt this mental burden. The German forces, despite their superior numbers and resources, were also breaking under the pressure. In fact, the Germans were facing the same internal collapse that the Soviets were, only they didn't yet know it. For General Chuikov, the mental toll of Stalingrad wasn't just about strategy and military tactics. Every decision he made carried the weight of his soldiers' lives. His men were starving, freezing, and dying by the thousands. What if he made the wrong call? What if he sent them to their deaths for nothing? At the same time, the German commanders were not immune to the psychological toll. Field Marshal Paulus was tasked with leading the German Sixth Army in its siege of Stalingrad, and while he projected confidence on the outside, on the inside, the pressure was mounting. The situation was deteriorating, and with every passing day, the reality of defeat seemed more and more likely. Paulus had been given orders from Hitler to capture Stalingrad at all costs, but those orders didn't take into account the human cost of such a decision. As the siege dragged on, it became clear to Paulus that not only was the battle becoming impossible to win, but it was also costing him his men, his leadership, and ultimately, his sense of control. Imagine being in his shoes. You're in charge of an army, but that army is slowly being picked apart by the elements, the Soviet counterattacks, and the mounting desperation of the troops. You've given everything you have to maintain the siege, but deep down, you know you're losing, not just the battle but the war for your own sanity. Paulus's situation was made worse by the fact that Hitler refused to allow him to retreat. In his mind, the battle for Stalingrad was crucial to Germany's overall strategy, but in reality, it had become a psychological trap. Every order Paulus gave, every soldier he sent into the fray, became a psychological weight that wore him down. The pressure of maintaining morale, of ensuring that the men continued to fight despite the hopelessness, was a crushing burden. And yet, Paulus kept pushing forward. Like Chuikov, he couldn't afford to show weakness, not to his men, not to his superiors, and certainly not to himself. Before we continue, if you're enjoying the deep dive into the psychological battles of Stalingrad, hit that like button and subscribe to Epic Battles Explained for more gripping stories of war that go beyond the battlefield. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below. What's your perspective on the psychological toll of war? Could you have endured what these soldiers faced? But it wasn't just the generals who felt this crushing psychological pressure. The soldiers in the trenches of Stalingrad were dealing with a mental battlefield of their own. For the soldiers on the front lines, survival wasn't just a matter of fighting the enemy, it was a matter of keeping their minds intact while facing an overwhelming sense of dread. The Soviet soldiers had to contend with hunger, exhaustion, and the constant threat of death. The constant barrage of artillery, the screams of the wounded, and the cold that gnawed at their bones, these were all elements that wore down their physical resolve. But even more damaging was the emotional and psychological strain. Some soldiers began to question the very nature of their struggle. Was it worth it? Was this war truly about defending their country, or was it about political ideologies that meant nothing in the face of death? The harsh reality of trench warfare, with its endless cycle of death and destruction, made it difficult for many to keep fighting. On the other side, the German soldiers were facing a similar mental breakdown. They were caught in the same trap, isolated, surrounded, and forced to confront the reality that they were losing. The battlefield wasn't just filled with bullets and blood, it was filled with a creeping sense of hopelessness. As winter set in, the German soldiers were forced to battle the elements as much as the Soviets. The freezing temperatures, combined with the constant bombardment, left them physically and mentally drained. Like the Soviet soldiers, they began to question their purpose in the battle. Was this just another sacrifice for a cause that seemed more and more meaningless? But what was even worse was the psychological exhaustion that came from knowing there was no way out. The German forces were trapped in Stalingrad, and the longer they stayed, the more it seemed like victory was an impossible dream. The mind can only endure so much before it begins to crack, and for many soldiers on both sides, that moment of collapse came long before their physical bodies gave in. As the winter dragged on and the siege continued, both sides were on the brink of collapse. For the Germans, the loss of morale was profound. Their supplies were running out, their soldiers were becoming increasingly desperate, and the mental toll was wearing them down. Meanwhile, the Soviets, despite being heavily outnumbered and under-equipped, found strength in their unity and resolve. But even they weren't immune to the psychological strain. Soldiers began to crack. The stress of constant fighting, the lack of supplies, and the overwhelming feeling of isolation were taking their toll. And then, in early 1943, as the Soviet counteroffensive began, the Germans were pushed back. The once formidable Sixth Army was now trapped. What had been an overwhelming force was reduced to a collection of mentally broken men, struggling to survive under increasingly impossible circumstances. The final collapse of the German forces at Stalingrad wasn't just military defeat, it was a psychological defeat. The German soldiers had endured unimaginable hardship, but in the end, it wasn't their physical endurance that caused their downfall. It was the overwhelming mental strain, the constant fear, the unrelenting pressure, and the crushing sense of defeat that led to their surrender. Thank you for watching. If the mental battles and psychological endurance of the soldiers at Stalingrad captivated you, make sure to subscribe and join the Epic Battles Explained community. We'll continue to explore the mind games that shaped history. And remember, it's not always the strongest who survive, it's the ones who can endure the longest. So, stay mentally strong and we'll see you in the next episode.